What's up, everybody? This is Trip.
And I'm Jim.
And this is Deadcenter, where we try to conversate, not constant hate, and get to the fucking point. We got some points today, but we've got somebody with us that is going to help us make some points, man. We're hoping to educate. We've got the regional director of the Anti-Defamation League for Mississippi, Arkansas, and Louisiana on the phone. And he's going to be hanging out with us. His name's Ahlquist, man. Aaron, say hello.
Hey, everybody.
Stoked to have you, man.
Yeah, man, we really are. He's our first guest if you're a listener to the show, like all 5 of you. But we're really excited about this, man. We've got a few different topics that cover specifically what I think the ADL is about. If you don't mind, for our listeners who aren't aware of who the ADL is, would you mind telling us a little bit about it first?
Sure. First of all, I'm honored to be your first guest. I think that's super exciting, and I'll try to do it justice. So the ADL is an organization that was formed in 1913, so we're 105 years old. We're a civil rights organization, and we're a Jewish organization. And our mission is to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment for all people. So my job is the regional director of the South Central region, which is, as Tripp said, the Arkansas, Mississippi, and Louisiana area. My mission is to do a couple things, but in a nutshell, our job is to fight hate and to fight bias and bigotry in all of its forms. And whether that's through anti-Semitism or racism, there are lots of ways that it's manifesting in our society right now. So I have a lot of work to do. We look at engaging students in educational settings. We work with K through 12 students. We work on college campuses. We also work closely with law enforcement, and we track extremist organizations and help law enforcement where there's issues around extremist activity too.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, I know you guys just released a pretty big report about neo-Nazi propaganda on college campuses, and I'd like to get to that in a little bit. But first and foremost, you brought up extremist groups, and we just had this big thing called the travel ban that was accepted by the Supreme Court. And me and Jim have talked about this on the show previously. You know, while there are reasons to be unsure about cautious. We both feel we live in America, where the land of the free and the home of the brave, and fear mongering isn't going to get anything done. And we'd really like to hear, your position on this from the spot that you sit at within the ADL.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head, is that fear mongering does not do anybody any good. And right now, and if I can step back for a second, you're asking about the Muslim ban, but I think this is a bigger issue. There is a divisiveness that's being generated through fear and through anger right now. And the way that our society is being put into vulnerable pockets and the way that we are being divided from one another is through the use of fear and anger. And I think if we look at it that way, and the level of or lack of discourse that we're seeing and our lack of ability to speak meaningfully with one another, this Muslim ban goes straight to the heart of that. It preys on insecurities. It goes to a place where it creates fear of an other that we don't really have any proof of animus towards us. And it's targeting a group of people that would otherwise be absolutely welcome here.
Well, one thing I wanted to touch on, because I'm not a fan of this ban specifically because of how it's portrayed. It wasn't portrayed as, okay, there are some frightening statistics from around the world. Like the Pew Research Group, they did a few studies about 3 to 4 years ago, and it found that while it was true that, less than 2% were actually extremists in the case that, they may do a suicide bombing or, plan a terrorist attack and execute that. There were over half of the Muslims in the world, not specifically in the United States, of course, but in certain pockets of France, in Afghanistan, Pakistan, some of the Middle Eastern countries that are okay or have mixed feelings with Osama bin Laden, they want Sharia law fully implemented in the area that they live in. They're okay with, no rights for certain, like gay rights, women's rights, things like that. They're okay with that not being the case. And I wonder, how we could have this conversation, how you think this conversation could be had with those statistics being there, right? Not as a, we're afraid of Muslims, but we're more worried that this ideology might infect Western culture and what we could do to help prevent it while still being America.
Well, you raise a good question as to still being America. There seems to be a lot of anger and hate right now into what that means. But right now, until this ruling this week from the Supreme Court, we took it as a given that we weren't allowed, and it was wrong to target people and discriminate against people specifically because of what religion they are. That ADL has filed amicus briefs to weigh in along those lines. We've joined in with a ton of other organizations to fight the ban specifically because it's targeting a group of people because of their religion.
Right. We remember the campaign trail Trump was on.
And we go down a very dark road when we start discriminating against and separating or isolating people simply because of what religion they belong to. And there's an extremely short-sightedness to this ban where you separate, isolate, and create resentment in a group of people. It tends to have a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then when you create anger and resentment in a group and deny access and deny opportunity, how are they going to view you in the future?
Right.
There's a lot of reasons why this is doing the exact opposite of what I guess its intended purpose is.
Do you think that it goes in tandem at all with the administration's decision to make a move in the Middle East in Israel by moving the embassy?
I don't think those two things are that closely related. I think we have the ability to kind of juxtapose Israel into any conversation about the Middle East. I don't think that in this case, this ban has much to do with Israel in any way, shape, or form. And just so you all know, I lived in Israel for a while, so I have some experience and perspective around Israel.
Heck yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I don't want to say we've been like anti-Israel on this show, but we've definitely been critical of Benjamin Netanyahu and the way that they've moved in the last, decade or so, and the way this administration has propped them up as some shining light in the Middle East.
The reason I asked about if it's in tandem is maybe because, you close the doors to any aggression that was stirred up just by the move itself. That was more of what I was asking.
Well, I don't know. I don't know that the challenges or the threats that Israel faces as a result of the move have much to do with some of the countries that are identified in the Muslim ban. And I will say, from ADL's perspective, I mean, we support Israel, its right to exist, and we're a Zionist organization, but we also have the right to be critical and oftentimes are very critical of some of the policies that are coming out of that country. And we will weigh in and push where we think if something is happening that's wrong, we will weigh in on that.
That's awesome to hear.
With that being said, maybe would you shine a little light on how the ADL felt about these recent protests at Gaza that involved Hamas and Israel?
Well, I think the easiest way to articulate it is that we very much believe and understand that I need to make this disclaimer that I am here while I'm the regional director. I'm speaking to you as myself.
Right.
I can speak to you as what some of ADL's positions are, but just so I don't get in trouble, I'm speaking as myself. Is that fair?
Yeah,
absolutely. 100%.
So to answer your question, I think it's really important to understand that ADL believes and works to support a two-state outcome. So targeting a meaningful opportunity for a two-state solution where there's a viable Palestinian state next to a secure and safe Israeli state. Sometimes that feels like it's a long way off. Sometimes it feels almost impossible, but we believe that we can keep working towards that and with the hopes that we get to that point. And what happened along the Gaza border, what happened in the aftermath of the move, kind of clouded that pathway forward. It made it harder for Israel to say, we're in a secure place that allows us to move towards this two-state discussion. And clearly the Gazans were showing their sense of outrage and frustration at the situation in which they were living and the non-sustainability of the living conditions in Gaza. I mean, it needs attention, and the hope is that by coming to the table both meaningfully, there can be an opportunity to lessen some of the I guess, lack of access and lack of options. And I'm not going to go into my thoughts on, the contribution to that hopeless situation being made by their own governance and with Hamas. But when things like that happen, when people feel they have no choice other than to rise up like that, it sure makes conversation around peace seem a lot more distant.
I really appreciate you touching on that. I know that wasn't why we originally brought you on, and it's just the curiosity popped up that there may be something there.
Absolutely. Well, to bring it home, it's called a travel ban, and this is the third iteration of it at this point, and it does only block out these 5 specific countries that have terrorist activity and suspected terror cells, and it really gets on my nerves when the media portrays it specifically as it's just a travel ban. You guys are out of your minds. When we watched Donald Trump on the whole campaign trail, Aaron, I know you can't really go into as far as getting on Trump's ass a little bit, but
I would interject something, and I would prefer not to be getting on anybody's ass, but along the lines of what you're saying, though, I think there's a consistency of rhetoric that's been used throughout from the campaign trail to today that points to what the intention is behind the travel ban.
Right.
I do find it interesting that Venezuela and North Korea were added to this one, especially in light of our apparently newfound détente with North Korea.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions circulating there that I know me and Jim have covered. We cover a lot of international politics a lot, and North Korea was a topic for at least like 5 straight episodes.
Neither of us are shocked that now there's reports that they're just going about their nuclear business as usual.
Yeah. Well, from that isolationist talk from the right, let's move this along to the current immigration debacle. It's become something of a saga on this show now.
Talk about nationalism and isolationism.
Yeah, really. We now we take it from the foreign front to the home front. So there's now Donald Trump has signed this executive order, and Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong, but now instead of detaining children away from each other, they've got the whole family together at this point. Is that kind of where it's going now?
I think that was the hope of the judge, saying that these families need to be reunited, but the executive order that he signed, I believe, did away with the policy of separating children. However, since that time, I'm not aware of any families being reunited. There are thousands of children that remain in detention facilities by themselves. There are still hearings ongoing where 3- and 4-year-olds are being forced to go in and self-advocate in immigration court. I mean, that's
heartbreaking,
and nothing is fixed yet.
No, it's not. It's become very clear that the executive order that he signed was merely a symbol of, hey, I'm trying, when really you're trying to look good for the media because of the public outcry.
Well, I will say, though, that this seems to be one of the first instances where public outcry actually seemed to sway the outcome and led to that executive order. We were calling for an order, and we're calling for changes in every way that we could think of, along with almost everybody else. And this separation of children from families was about as un-American of a thing as I could possibly imagine.
Well, there's a reason the last 3 presidents didn't put these people that were crossing illegally in criminal court. They put them in civil court so they could keep it together.
And now we got our no tolerance policy, which kicked off the whole struggle.
Right, it made it roll. I did want to talk a little bit. Are you able to talk a little bit about some immigration with us?
Sure, I'm happy to.
Well, following kind of along the same lines with the Muslim ban, like there's reasons to be cautious for immigration, right? Or for illegal immigration, right? There's reasons to have a conversation about how can we reform this. But you can't have that conversation with the backdrop of all the Mexicans are bad. You can't have that. Now there are cartels along the border. There are things like that do run rampant. You see a lot of the drug, all of the heroin, a majority of the crystal meth, a lot of the marijuana, a lot of the drugs that come into the United States do come from Mexico. And I guess I'm saying all that to say, how can we come together bipartisanly and have this conversation where we're able to put the people seeking asylum and work first while still combating things.
I think what the question you're asking goes way beyond this. It goes way beyond immigration. It goes way beyond border security. What you're really asking is how the heck are we going to start talking to each other? How are we going to have effective conversation with one another from the various sides with differing opinions, but coming together to create meaningful change? And that's what's seriously missing in our public discourse right now.
Absolutely. Well, when we were talking prior to this, you hit the nail on the head. You know, the call for civility is bullshit, but the call for discourse is absolutely there. We have to be able to talk. And a lot of times I've noticed, anytime I've talked to somebody from the other side, as long as I'm willing to give them the room to speak, it often leads to civility more often than not.
If I can chime in for a second, there's something that I just want to communicate about a past experience that I've had and how it influences what my perspective is today. When I was a little bit younger, I was on Senate staff in Washington, D.C., and we were pretty far left of center in how we approached our day-to-day activities, how we approached, trying to serve the American people and our constituents. And one of the things I realized, though, is when I was on the Hill, even though we may have an identity that would be progressive left of center, we worked so closely with people on the other side. Oftentimes, people ideologically completely opposed in most areas, but there was always the willingness to talk and always that willingness to find where there was common ground opportunity to make a difference. And that even when there was disagreement, there was the capacity to talk to one another, and that an understanding that we move forward through compromise, and we move forward through a willingness, through the lens of serving the people, and that we may have different approaches to how we think is best to do that, but that through compromise, we can actually govern the country. And that seems to be completely devoid, or there seems to be a complete absence of that in our current discussion level.
Absolutely.
So about immigration, I just wanted to say my perspective is trying to figure out how to have a conversation where disagreement doesn't end the conversation. It just starts opening up discussion about where the opportunities for compromise lie.
Do you think maybe, I mean, I hate to digress a little too much here, but maybe right now election cycles seem to be, whoever's the farthest, that could be the farthest in opposition to whoever is the opposition, the other team, is the one that's going to be the front runner. And the idea that you would reach over the aisle and compromise is like this sign of weakness that doesn't get you reelected.
Yeah, I mean, we seem to have this kind of identity politics reality right now where both sides seem to be so up in arms against one another, so angry and really so fearful to lose what they seem to be holding on to, that there's not a willingness to really open up the conversation. And we got to figure out how to get back to that point. Otherwise, we could be in a lot of trouble as a nation.
I think we both completely agree with that.
Well, that's kind of why we started this show, man. That just the whole concept of, hey, there are some things that are right on the right, and there are some things that are right on the left. How do those two thought processes blend?
Our motto is conversate, not constant hate.
Absolutely.
I say that you're onto an important point, and I appreciate that.
We appreciate that.
Yes, sir. Well, now that we're talking immigration, you had recently posted on Facebook a letter you wrote to Scalise. And if you wouldn't mind, would you kind of go over that with us for the listeners and what that entails and what it could actually do as far as solving? Because a lot of people don't realize you can write your senators and stuff.
Well, yeah, I think that to hit on that last point first, we all have a voice as American citizens. We have a voice that we can raise and that we can use to affect the direction our country takes, and we need to use that or we lose it. And in doing so, reach out to your senators, reach out to your representatives. If they do something you agree with, I promise you they love to hear that you're in favor of what they're doing. If they do something you disagree with, they need to hear from you that you disagree with it. So use your use your fingers to dial the phone, type up emails, write letters if anybody still does that. Make sure that your voice is heard, and I promise you that there's somebody on the other end that will receive those, and that they will be marked and they will be tracked. So your voices are important. Don't forget to use them. So to talk about what I did with Representative Scalise, my offices are in the New Orleans area, and Representative Scalise he's a Louisiana representative, and his offices are about a mile from mine. He's also the majority whip for the Republican Party, so he's in leadership. And if everybody remembers when all this was happening with the separation of families, you were having this back and forth with the president saying, I can't do anything, the law needs to be changed, and I can't make an executive order. And you have the representatives and the senators saying, I wish we could do something, but it's kind of up to the president, and they're just passing the ball back and forth. And what I did is I just wrote a letter to Representative Scalise, and I said, look, you're a leader. Weigh in your leadership capacity and see what you can do. There's legislative proposals that are out there that would stop this and that would change the law so that kids aren't getting separated and that these families are being treated with basic dignity and humanity. And, I sent that letter in. We got a lot of attention with that. A lot of other groups saw it and were appreciative of it. And then Trump signed his executive order the next day. So There's still a number of legislative options out there. Truth be told, that with Trump's executive order, there's definitely going to need to be legislative change. And there's some good proposals and bad proposals out there. I'm sure they're all going to get picked up, but hopefully Representative Scalise read the letter and knows where our stand is, and there's some change coming in a good way.
You say that there's good proposals. Would you mind outlining the best one you've seen so far?
Yeah, what would be the front runner in your mind for best option?
Well, I don't know the language of all the different proposals out there, and this letter I wrote is about a week and a half old, but at the time there was a proposal for Keep Families Together Act, which basically took a kind of a very scalpel approach to this to carve out and address the immediate need to stop the practice of what was happening to everybody's horror. It's called the Keep the Families Together Act. It's what we're pushing. There are over 100 House co-sponsors on it. The key right now is getting bipartisan support on anything, because there seems to be that unwillingness to add names to something where it's
especially with November coming up.
Right. Well, that goes back to what Jim was saying earlier about how, if you are willing to come across the aisle and stretch out your hand and say, let's shake, there's a sense that you're weak for some reason.
Well, and if you look at what happened in South Carolina in the primaries, where the incumbent lost in the primaries because of making critical comments of the president, there seems to be kind of a purity test that's being applied on both sides.
That's scary.
It is super scary.
That's super scary. Man, I'm really glad that we were able to talk about that and go through that. Man, I feel like we're flying. We've gone through immigration, we've gone through Muslim ban, and all this isolationist crap. It kind of leads into a little bit of what the ADL just recently released, the report on the dramatic increase in neo-Nazi propaganda on college campuses through this school year, 2017-2018. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that, touch on, why you think that might be the case.
Sure. So one of the things that we do is we track hate incidents around the country as they occur, and those take a lot of shapes and forms. One of them that we've been tracking and we just released a report on is the increase in white supremacist campus propaganda incidents. If you go to ADL.org website, and you guys might be able to post the report itself on your website.
Right. Yeah. We posted it with advertising for this week's show, but we'll definitely throw it back up there when we post it for sure.
So one of the things that we tracked is how often white supremacist groups, and it's really a few that are primary, but how often white supremacist groups were going onto college campuses. And we call it flyering, which is basically putting up flyers that espouse their propaganda or trying to recruit or advertising engagement points, advertising events. And one of the things that we noticed over a 9-month window, basically the 2017-18 school year, we saw a 77% increase of incidents around the country from the past year, almost 300 cases in 47 states where white supremacist groups were flyering on college campuses. So the year before was 165, last year 292. And if you look at what was happening around the country in mid-year in New Orleans, which was kind of served as a flashpoint, our mayor stood strong and he took down our Confederate monuments, or a number of Confederate monuments. And that kind of served as a flashpoint where all of a sudden this outcry and outrage and anger, kind of the white heritage, white supremacist outrage, started bubbling to the surface. And a few months later, you have Charlottesville. So in August of 2017, you have Charlottesville.
Which was absolutely disgusting, if I do say so.
Yeah, which is absolutely disgusting, but you have hundreds. And if you look at what it was called the Unite the Right rally.
Right. And
it was one of the first times that all these fascist, white supremacist, neo-Nazi, and alt-right groups wanted to come together to make a unified, strong statement. And I believe the purpose was to oppose the taking down of additional Confederate monuments. And everybody saw how that blew up in Charlottesville, and saw the videos of the tiki torch wielding marchers and shouting "Jews will not replace us" and other fascist slogans.
There's a difference in debating about the taking down of Confederate statues and coming out and being neo-Nazis shouting shit like that in the streets.
Sure. That was kind of a flashpoint that started propelling this whole thing forward. So what happens then in the months following, you have really angry, really empowered groups out there, or emboldened groups out there, who feel that they watch this changing discourse that we have in our society, this willingness to use hate and bigotry and divisiveness in how we talk to each other, this decrease in civility, and they say, well, we have an opportunity to start strengthening our ranks. And college kids are kind of a captive audience, right? So college kids, they're at school, they're going to see flyers that get put up, and one of the things about putting flyers up is that it could be one or it could be 10 people. Nobody knows how many people are actually putting the flyers up. So it's a way of masking numbers. And all of a sudden you have these groups espousing and promoting hate that are slapping up recruitment posters all over the place. And so that's one of the things we track, and then we'll work with campus law enforcement, campus groups, and campus administration when these things are happening to have some effective response.
Let me ask you a question about that. Now, we sit here and we definitely completely oppose the neo-Nazi movement, the Unite the Right, all that kind of shit, right? It's terrible. But I'd like to know, should these people be allowed to espouse that stuff? Or what is your stance on that? Because a lot of... I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Please finish your question.
No, just wondering, how the free speech aspect of this goes in. Because, on the one hand, it is free speech, but on the other hand, like where does it start? Why does it start at speech and stop at ramming a car into a crowd of 20?
So that's the important distinction, right? We're a civil rights organization, and we believe the paramount importance of the First Amendment. And the First Amendment protects a lot of things. It protects separation of church and state. It separates protection from religion, protection of religion, but it protects speech. And we are full believers in the sanctity of free speech. So hate speech is not necessarily a hate crime. We're opposed to hate speech, and we will work to build more inclusive and tolerant society to hopefully counter hate speech. But where speech manifests in violence, or where speech promotes violence, violence or sends out dog whistles or does whatever it is that results in somebody driving a car through people or somebody picking up a gun or doing some kind of violent act, well, that's incitement or inducement, and that is different than a protected speech. You cannot promote or do something that results in violence. That's a big difference. Also, free speech does not necessitate everybody around you listening to you. Right? You can say what you want. You are not entitled to an audience necessarily. So, we are not opposed to people being allowed to speak their minds. And on college campuses, most campus administrations are not in the practice of limiting speech either. So it puts us in kind of a tricky position in how we counter something that feels clearly evil or based on hate and prejudice, but has a place as a protected part of our society.
Could there be some sort of, and this is me maybe trying to reach for some kind of compromise here, but it's one thing to go on a public campus and pass out flyers, but it'd be, or maybe even stand on your soapbox in the quad and yell at people, but like the idea of a structured, scheduled, Richard Spencer or whoever coming in and talking about it and trying to, at that point, it's you're sitting students down to listen to it. Maybe is there something there that maybe that's no longer free speech because it's in somewhat of a classroom setting?
Well, you mean if they're a captive audience?
Well, more along the lines of it being like a scheduled talk. I mean, a lot of the times that they talk about, Richard Spencer had a talk, I thought it was just standing in the quad and yelling, but it turns out he was actually, scheduled through the school administration.
People paid money to hear him.
Yeah, I mean, is that something that maybe we could limit on college campuses, or is that just another staple of free speech?
Well, so it's a good question. One of the things that kind of warmed my heart was he had, I think, a speaking engagement at Michigan State, and nobody showed up. And that's the way you counter this, is that you just you don't give that platform. That platform may be there, just you don't go.
Yep.
And one of the things that to kind of build on that is when we have instances of flyering or publicity or publication out of the white supremacists or neo-Nazis or whatever, the extremists, we don't publicize it. We communicate it with administration, we communicate it with law enforcement so they know what might be happening if they need to take appropriate measures to protect their students and their schools. We're not going to go blasting it all over media and give these groups the attention that they're looking for attention, so we're not going to give it to them.
Absolutely, yeah.
Use it as a rallying point.
You're right. Well, I definitely feel like the more you try to push them away, the more traction they're able to get within their own fan base. And I think it's an opportunity to let the market decide, so to speak. You have the chance to boycott and protest, and that's when we should take those opportunities and use our rights.
So
yeah, just to plug ADL for 1 second for your listeners, if anybody listening to this comes across something where they see flyering or they hear of something happening or they hear about the aftermath of some kind of incident, reach out to your ADL office because reach out to law enforcement as well because they're the ones that would take any necessary action. But we track this. We track incidents and events all over the country, and it helps us know what's going on, and then we'll work with law enforcement to make sure they're being effective in their responses. So reach out to your local ADL office if there's something you come across that you think is not right or is clearly an extremist effort to build publicity or whatever.
And you can find that information on the ADL.org website, correct?
Yes. In fact, what I can also do is after this show, I'll send you guys a link that will list where our offices are.
That would be awesome. That'd be super dope.
Definitely. Do you think that Trump emboldened these people with his speech directly, or do you think maybe the media blowing it up as this is hate speech and we can't have it, and these people are seeing that side of it and going, oh well, this is hate speech. That's the president doing it. We can do it too.
Well, like, is it Trump or is it the media blowback? Is that what you're...
That's basically what I'm asking. Okay, is it Trump himself being perceived by these people as emboldening them, or is it us looking at it and going, look how terribly white supremacist that is, that has caused these people to kind of go, wait a minute, he's a white supremacist. We can use him as protection, I guess.
There is nothing new about bigotry, racism, intolerance. There's nothing new about our willingness to point at somebody and say them, and point at ourselves and say us, and to create a division between the groups. We have a legacy in this country of terrible bigotry, terrible racism. We're still dealing with some of the after effects and the legacy issues of that. As far as where we're sitting right now and why we're seeing this uptick, I feel that there's a lot that had been under the surface for a while, and there's a seeming tacit permission because of the level of discourse from the top down, and it seemingly all levels of society right now is pointing a finger at the other side and saying, look at those guys, they're being un-American in how they're acting, whether it's the left pointing at the right or the right pointing at the left. And what you're seeing, because of that anger and frustration, I think everybody's frustrated right now. Because of that, it gives opportunity for kind of fringe groups to assert themselves and say, look, we've been saying this for a long time. We're speaking to you right now because you're showing us you're angry and you're frustrated. Come with us, and we'll help make things simpler for you, because really it's those people that are causing all your problems. And there's a seeming increased receptivity to that kind of messaging right now, and that's what we really have to work to fight against.
Well, I wanted to also maybe touch on a little bit before we go about, we started to talk about free speech on college campuses. And you see, like with the Unite the Right rally, they try to lump the right in. And then even with Donald Trump and his response to Charlottesville, there were good people on both sides. But then you look at people like Ben Shapiro, who is literally Jewish, and people like Dave Rubin or Charlie Kirk, plenty of Republican speakers that go across the country that aren't considered racist. They're just Republican. And you look at groups like Antifa that riot and like UC Berkeley. That's right? UC Berkeley.
That's where you said Shapiro needed his. They ended up canceling.
Yeah, needed like $600,000 for security for 5'4" little Ben Shapiro, because they were afraid he was going to incite a riot. And you had Joy Reid calling him a member of the alt-right, and that's like literally the opposite. I just wonder how we can differentiate, or maybe how the ADL is able to help with that, because they're obviously not the same, but they get lumped together, I guess is where I'm going.
You mean the alt-right and the white supremacists?
And just Republican.
No.
I mean like just Republican speakers versus the alt-right.
Well, there's a different. Ben Shapiro specifically, really where he is on the right is with the economics. Really, I mean, he's very objectivist in his economic views, and because he's so conservative in that light, and that's his light that he likes to shine, he gets lumped in with the alt-right, who's socially, I guess we could say, backwards or right or whatever.
Right.
And what I guess you're asking is, therefore, like, what do we do to differentiate the people that are just, economic and federally conservative versus people that are
the whack jobs,
the alt-right,
right? The people who, the Richard Spencer. How do we differentiate the Richard Spencers versus the Ben Shapiro's and Charlie Kirk's and stuff like that?
Well, so I think right now the Republican Party is having kind of a moment of, or at least a need for intense introspection as far as, what is it and what is its identity? Because I think right now it's at a crossroads point, and it's kind of at a moment where, by asking itself what it is going to define how it emerges from this period in time. And it's going to, the traditional kind of economic conservatives, maybe center-right conservatives, there is a diminishing voice at the table within the Republican Party right now that's inclusive of those viewpoints, and it feels that those viewpoints are not necessarily being heard in an equal volume in the White House and who Trump is listening to right now. So I think the first answer to your question is the Republicans probably need to figure out who they are before we can figure out who they are. Does that make sense?
That's a really good way to put that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I like that a lot.
Yeah. Well, because I tend to lean left, but I'm not completely opposed to constitutional conservatism. And since Bush, or maybe even before Bush, I was born in '91, so it gives you a little sense of my age. But it just feels like constitutional conservative is a thing of the past, especially when we spend as much as we did in the omnibus package and then cut corporate taxes to a low since Reagan.
Well, I'm going to say this too, that ADL is nonpartisan. Some of my greatest allies are conservatives. Some of the people that I struggle with the most are progressives. It is important for me to say that we are a centrist organization. We engage on issues that are mission-centered issues. So where we see hate proliferating public discourse, we're going to weigh in on that. I'm not going to say us versus them ever, because that goes contrary to who we are and what our mission is. Right now I'm very concerned about kind of this lack of cohesiveness across the spectrum. And one of the things that you touched on, and I'm going to circle it back to the Muslim ban and to maybe capstone this entire conversation, is that we run into trouble when we try to put kind of monolithic ideas on a group of people, when groups of people are all over the place. I mean, you hit it where there are very conservative Jews who raise their voice talking on conservative issues, and they're very progressive Jews. The Jewish population is not in consensus necessarily about everything that's going on in Israel. The Muslim population, you cannot possibly ascribe entire traits across the board to an entire population from multiple different countries, just like you can't do that to the refugees that are fleeing to come into the United States, or the immigrants that are being separated from their kids. You can't do that. And I think that goes across every question, every point of conversation that we've had today. We cannot ascribe traits to an entire population. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
You're absolutely right, man. Aaron, you came on this show and blew our minds today, man. Thank you so much.
We cannot thank you enough for doing this, man.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Again, this is Aaron Ahlquist. He's the regional director of the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, for Mississippi, Louisiana, and Arkansas, man. You can check out the ADL's mission statement at adl.org.
We'll have a link when we share the episode.
We will have a link in YouTube and on Facebook. And yeah, man, thanks again, Aaron. If you'll just hold on for a second after we wrap up, we'll get with you. But I think that covers it today, Jim. Is that it?
Yeah, man, that was beautiful. I loved it.
All right, man. I'm Trip.
And I'm Jim.
And this is Deadcenter, where we try to conversate, not concentrate, and get
to the fucking point.
Love
We'll see
y'all.
next
Like,
week.
subscribe, share, and we'll get with you next week.
Well, I don't know why I came here tonight. I got the feeling that something ain't right. I'm so scared in case I fall off my chair, and I'm wondering how I'll get down the stairs. Clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right. Here I am, stuck in the middle with you. Yes, I'm stuck in